Hey everybody, Jason Burmis here, and we got a humdinger of a who whistle of a show for you. The last time I had Tony Gosling on was pre-Boris Johnson actually becoming the Prime Minister of the UK. He continues to say that with or without a deal, we are going to have Brexit by the end of October. This to me is not only interesting, is it implausible? I'm not sure. Somebody closer to the matter is going to be weighing in on the situation. So why don't you just give us a summary of where we've gone before it was official that Boris and his regime was going to take over, and where we are today, and the continued opposition we've seen to Brexit along this road.
Okay, so the situation we got now, Jason, is very weird because Boris is the Prime Minister, but he's actually not in control of the majority in the Houses of Parliament. So this is almost unprecedented. What we generally have here is a pretty usual, simple system whereby if a Prime Minister can no longer command a majority, then there has a vote of confidence and potentially either a new Prime Minister or a general election takes place. Now, Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of the opposition, and the other parties in Britain have just simply refused to do that because they want to just delay Brexit and delay Brexit. So he's a hostage prime minister in power. But the fact is he still is in power. Okay, well, let's just also recycle right the way back to 2016. It was a long, hot summer where we had the referendum. I remember very, very well just 2 weeks before the referendum being over at Bilderberg in Dresden. And it was the buzzing hot topic, not only in the Bilderberg conference, but also amongst all the commentators outside, what is going to happen in this Brexit referendum. I actually spoke at the time to two of the Bilderbergers about Brexit. It was a one-way conversation because as soon as I said the word, you could see their hackles go up. It's almost like their hair standing on end and they turn around and walk in the other direction. None of the Bilderberger elite, these people do not want to even think about Brexit. Anyone that suggests that it might happen or that it might be a good idea, this is even, 3 years ago. The elite absolutely hate the idea that their wonderful plan put together for a united Europe, similar to United States of America, so a United States of Europe, but with even less democratic accountability. That is to say, they'll find failed politicians to put into the cabinet, into power in Europe. People who've been rejected by the public then get a second chance and become European commissioners, and they're now running the show. So that's it. That's the EU that was created. And the people that created it, the banksters, the bankers, the oil people, the tech giant types, and it has to be said, intelligence services as well were involved. The CIA definitely involved. The Council on Foreign Relations definitely involved in the creation of the EU originally. That whole process was anathema to them. They hated the idea. And everyone pretty much was surprised when the vote came out. Actually, Britain has voted to leave. At which point Cameron disappeared off the stage and Theresa May arrived. And she spent the next nearly 3 years trying to delay it and delay it and delay it, promising again and again on the 29th of March 2019, we will be leaving, no doubt about it. And of course, we never did, because her husband, Philip May, who's a financial investment guy at Capital Group in the US, he was actually doing a lot of the negotiating. Theresa May had, we've now found out, farmed off the negotiating, not just to civil servants, but also to her husband. And that was one of the reasons why there was no real Brexit happening, because all of the attempts by the European Union were being caved into by the British. Anyway, Boris is a complete new broom. I'm no fan of the guy. He made a mess of London when he was mayor of London. He's also a member of the Bullingdon Club, which people must know is also Nathan Rothschild a member. The leader writer from the Financial Times is a member. George Osborne, who was the Chancellor, was a member. David Cameron was a member. These guys were all going to Eton, then on to Oxford, and then part of the Bullingdon Club, which is, many people say, is a kind of British equivalent of what you've got, the Skull and Bones. A similar kind of an organisation where these young kids get told, OK, you can go and smash things up if you want to. We don't really care. And by the way, you're going to be running the country in the future. We'll make sure. And this is the way the oligarchy like to run things. So that's where we are now. Is we've got this guy in power who said he is going to leave. Parliament has voted with something called the Ben Bill, now the Ben Act. That will force Boris Johnson to go to the EU, cap in hand, and say, oh, actually, we want an extension. But he believes, and the government now believe, that they found legal routes around this act of Parliament. And so really, Parliament has become sandwiched between the people that want Brexit and the government that want Brexit, but Parliament is in between trying to stop it. And of course, it's just a matter of time before there's a general election and they're kicked out and something else happens. But when this Brexit happens, we've been guaranteed by these people, and it does look as if they've got a cunning plan to make sure Brexit really does happen on Halloween, when the banksters will rise from the dead. And
what a date,
we will
right?
see
what
crazy
a date.
new world where they will try and bash Britain. They will try and smash Britain. They'll smash the pound. They'll throw everything at us. It'll be like a tidal wave coming across the English Channel from France, hitting Britain, an economic tidal wave. And all of a sudden, that tidal wave will come up the Thames. It'll hit the Houses of Parliament. But it will be an economic war, I think, after Brexit, if Brexit happens on Halloween, Jason. And that's what we're having to sort of prepare ourselves for here, because they're not going to be at all happy that Britain is sailing off into the Atlantic and really signing the death warrant of the European Union project. So this is a biggie. Halloween is going to be a biggie this time.
Now, I got to ask you, aside from just those politics, right now we have things heating up in the Middle East, especially with Iran and Saudi Arabia. Bin Salman was just quoted as saying, if Saudi Arabia goes to Iran, oil prices will skyrocket to unimaginable levels. These people that control banks often also have something to say in the Department of Energy and Oil. Let's say we have that perfect storm, just like you say. Let's say Brexit does happen. These people have pretty much vowed that there is going to be economic instability and chaos. That coupled with an actual conflict in the Middle East that goes beyond what we already have, which is insanity over the last few months, kind of a tit for tat, but we have an escalation in U.S. troops. We have an escalation in more than rhetoric, in my opinion. We have a public that's not really that concerned. So show me what the world looks like with a Brexit and suddenly a war in the Middle East regarding Iran and Saudi Arabia. Whether or not the United States troops get involved, just that spike in oil prices alone.
Well, look, when these things happen, Jason, as you know, there's always a blame game immediately, straight away on the media, like we saw with bin Laden in 9/11. Somebody is going to be blamed. And of course, if there's an economic disaster, Brexit will be blamed. The British people, the Brexiteers, the musketeers of Brexit will be blamed for it. And it may also be that any kind of economic difficulties, like a stock market crash, partial crash or whatever, the war can be quite easily blamed on that. You say, well, actually, look, this is all tied in together. The fact of the matter is, though, that there is some evidence that the recent attacks in Saudi Arabia may have been allowed to happen by the British and by the United States, because there is a tremendous amount of surveillance and satellite networks and all sorts around Saudi Arabia. The idea that a drone attack can just kind of sneak through and boom, well, who does that benefit? That benefits the war faction. And, of course, the war faction is us, Britain and America. So it's quite feasible. We just went, oh, well, sorry, we didn't see those drones. And, oh, dear, it looks like tensions are ramping up in the Middle East. And, of course, we've seen that there was a gunfight. I don't know if you saw that at the weekend at King Salman's house with his 15-year bodyguard, closest friend for 15 years, shot
and he got
dead.
Fired just before that.
He
was let go.
Does actually make you wonder if maybe the tensions in the top of Saudi Arabia have reached a real height, because they're saying, well, hang on a minute, these British and Americans, we thought they were our pals. They've been buying the oil all this time. They're hanging us out to dry, man. And that's the sort of thing that could easily spark an argument.
And that's what people don't understand. Even though we have this Anglo-American, Saudi-Israeli alliance, there's often, not just a little time, espionage all the way around. Everybody's trying to get a one-up on the other. That's why the United States just outed, this, what was it, a group that was using the Stingray surveillance in D.C. That's dated material. Those devices, I guarantee that group that they were talking about in Politico, they had 3 separate intelligence officers come up. That's old hat. I bet you that was in there at least Obama administration, possibly even Bush administration prior to that, and they're just leaking that. We do the same thing in Tel Aviv. We look at Jamal Khashoggi. Obviously, you had Khashoggi, who was working with U.S. and Israeli interests for some time, but then kind of posing as this journalist. It's no wonder that he was taken out in this manner. And just like you said, the right-hand man of bin Salman, he's released a few days before this gunfight happens. He dies, and now they're trying to link to whether or not he was going to out something with the Khashoggi murder or something to do with the Saudi royal family. You always have to ask yourself if he was compromised prior and working with either U.S. or Israeli intelligence. These things are definitely not black and white. And, before we get back into UK politics, I want to talk about that drone attack for a second. We had the Houthi rebels take credit for it, but who's to say that you don't have a U.S. an Israeli asset come in a month, 2 months before, say they can provide this technology? Obviously, they got it from somewhere. And then, like you said, we look the other way on surveillance, allow it to happen. Lo and behold, nobody dies. But you have this kind of gray line where Pompeo gets to say, Iran attacked Saudi Arabia. We don't have any evidence, but Iran attacked Saudi Arabia. And then at the same time, you got the Houthi rebels taking credit for this, but the whole time it could be some kind of middleman false flag op.
But let me just come in here, because if you notice what's been going on in the EU at the same time, they have been saying, oh dear, we're going to pull out of the JCPOA. Well, hang on a minute, EU, you're supposed to be independent of the United States, or is this just a kind of good cop EU, bad cop Washington game you're playing with the JCPOA and Iran? So the EU, at the very time they should be saying, well, hang on a minute, guys, we don't want to ramp up tensions with Iran. They are threatening to pull out of the Iran nuclear deal in the EU. Many people have missed this kind of thing. It's all been going on at the same time, just in the run-up to the UN General Assembly. One thing I also really have to say about the General Assembly, Boris's speech was quite good. I don't know if you saw it. It was all about AI and how Google are taking over our minds, which was, nobody else at the General Assembly was really saying these things. He did quite a entertaining talk talking about Prometheus, which makes you wonder about, what kind of I would suggest people sit and watch it. It's about 15 minutes long. He did it at 4 o'clock in the morning. But, again, I'm not a fan of Boris. I'm really not. I honestly say that. But what he did was quite stood out from the other stuff. He didn't mention anything about Iran, didn't mention anything about Russia or anything like that. He just wanted to talk about, come on, everybody, come to London next year and let's get these tech giants in line, which was a great thing to say, actually. And it's an important venue to be able to do that. The other one for me was the star of the show was Imran Khan in Pakistan, talking about 9/11, for example, saying, well, look, actually, we were completely wrong. We were hoodwinked getting involved in this war on terror in Pakistan, and it's ended up being a disaster. And we're not really sure what really happened on 9/11. He's great, Imran Khan. He's the cricketer that spent a lot of time in London, of course. So he's been a terrific leader from Pakistan, causing all sorts of I suppose, raised eyebrows and that sort of thing at the United Nations, bringing up 9/11 all this time afterwards and questioning, what really happened. But look, getting back to Brexit, Jason, and sorry, but I've got to say something about the European Defence Union, because this is the great hidden part of the EU. It's not being talked about at all in the mass media, in the mainstream press, but having a good look at what Brexit is really all about. The reason that all of these politicians, and they may not even know this, are so fixated on the deal is because the establishment in Europe are absolutely desperate to keep Britain in the European Defence Union, because it means that it's beginning to get an integrated command. Ursula von der Leyen is just about to take over as the president of Europe. They call him the president of the Commission, but actually it's the president of Europe, effectively, the decision maker. Ursula von der Leyen has been doing this the last 3 or 4 years, preparing all these plans for military unification. And this is this is my theory. I've got no evidence to back it up, but then that doesn't mean to say it's not true. And that is that I think it's the British Armed Forces that are behind Brexit, because they've said we are going to refuse to serve under, say, a French general or a German general or a Hungarian general, that our troops will only be put at risk by British senior officers. And that's what the European Defence Union will do. It will bring soldiers of one country under the command of another country. And so it may be that that's just, a deal too far for the British Armed Forces, and that behind the scenes, amongst the establishment, in the smoke-filled rooms of the London clubs, this is one of the main reasons why certain people in the establishment have said, no, hang on, we're not having this. There's also the fact that Carsten Kengeter from Bilderberg, the German-Swiss industrialist bankster, he was planning to take over the London Stock Exchange, to buy it up. And so that was kicked into the long grass just before the Brexit vote happened. So there's all sorts of things which may be really behind this, Jason, which haven't really been talked about. But it's really about the establishment watching basic things being taken away, like it's been, the things like the right for the Greeks to produce their own money, the Italians to produce their own money. That's gone. That went in 2000 with the euro, and it's been a total disaster. The eurozone has only fed wealth into Germany away from the periphery of the union. So the Brits thankfully didn't do that. We kept the pound. But I think it's interesting that we have been the first nation to say, no, we're not doing this. We're not having it.
And honestly, I hope we see it. But like you said, there are these forces at work that want to get Boris Johnson out. Is there actually a way? Well, we've talked about the cunning plan to finally get them out by October 31st. And this guy's been preaching, October Brexit, no deal, fine, we're going to do it. What do you think the opposition's plan looks like?
Well, the opposition are keep playing their cards quite close to their chest as well, Jason. I think the problem is that it will take a month between removing Johnson or having a vote of confidence and then a general election. So we're now at the stage where Brexit would happen before a general election. So that seems to me to be their problem. We may see some little tricks up their sleeve from between now and the 31st of October, but it's impossible for them to actually get a new prime minister, I think, until we've had a general election. I just don't think that the Conservative Party will stand for it and the other parties will stand for it. There may be some ruse by which they could do that, but if Boris can hang on, which basically he doesn't really need to do very much. He just needs to, cycle backwards and forwards to work every day. If he can hang on till the end of the month, and once we get to the 31st, if he's still Prime Minister at that point, we will be out. I don't think there's much doubt about that. And the opposition, that is the Labour Party and the opposition within the Conservative Party and other groups like the SNP, the Scottish Nationalists, they have really got to get rid of him if they want to stop Brexit, because they thought they were going to do that with this Ben bill. It now looks as if the Conservative government have found a way around that. They're having to cope all the time, though, with a civil service which is leaking all the time to the BBC. And the mass media in Britain is almost fanatically Remain. Never mind what the people think. The media has been trying to get Boris all the time, the same sort of way as your media has been trying to get Trump, any reason to have a go at the guy. Hey, he hasn't started the war with Iran yet. What's wrong with Trump? We need to attack this guy. What are we going to do about him today? Let's drag up some nonsense scandal, recycle it 500 times on the rolling news networks and make everyone hate him. And then what happens with this is the viewers just start thinking, what a joke, what a bunch of idiots these mass media are. So we're getting to the stage now, I think, where people are chucking stuff at the TV, certainly here, and raising their eyebrows and just switching it off, Jason.
Well, all right, I want to cycle back to you talking about Boris Johnson's speech, which I'm going to check out, and the Khan speech. I thank you for putting me onto that. And you saying, you're not a fan. In the same way, I'm not a fan of Trump. However, him considering talking to the Taliban on the anniversary of 9/11 in Camp David was a good thing to me. And then we had the media running with that was why the rift happened, the instant rift with John Bolton, right? But then a couple days later, they also talked about the fact that Trump had maybe been discussing lifting sanctions on Iran. Now, first of all, do you think that there's you think that's aftermarket bullshit that they put out there to kind of spin this hero Trump story? Or do you think that's plausible And that is one of the reasons that they got rid of Bolton. What's your take on the Bolton exit and what really went down there?
Well, that's really a difficult one to answer, but I would suggest, what we've seen is not really a massive upping of the anti-Iran rhetoric. I think actually what we're seeing is Trump is getting towards the end of his term. He realizes he could be up for re-election. The last thing he wants is a war. And he also wants to do some sort of deal with the Iranians. I don't think he buys this Israeli bullying and pressure to hate Iran. I don't think he buys it at all, personally. And so it may well be that there's some truth to his attempts to get trade going. I mean, this guy, he's a businessman. He can see if you can get trade going. I mean, he's also wondering, isn't he? What happens if Saudi Arabia gets it? What happens if a whole load of oil fields go up in smoke? Hey, we might need to buy our oil from Iran, So, I mean, I think there's a practicality to Trump, which I don't see many other contenders. Certainly, this whole Biden business that blew up last week. I mean, that's just a whole load of nonsense, really, by the press trying to, sort of have a go at Trump for no apparent real reason. I mean, yes, Hunter Biden was over in Ukraine, and yes, Hunter Biden was stopping prosecutions of a gas company over there. And so, of course, Trump is going to want to know, have you found anything out about this? This is interesting. I mean, he's having a chat to the new president, Vladimir Zelensky, just as he would to you or I. Yeah, what's the latest on this, man? There was absolutely nothing to see with that, nothing impeachable at all.
Tony,
and
the craziest thing is
on and on and on.
That now in this country, the scandal's not the scandal. I actually reported on Burisma back in April when you had a video that, by the way, was out in January of 2018, but it came to light, where Biden is sitting next to Richard Haass, the head of the CFR, and some underling, bragging in front of a bunch of millionaires that he comes in, he'd already had a deal with Poroshenko and I believe it was Levenko, that this prosecutor was going to go, and that he hadn't gone yet. And I mean, he's in front of this audience, and he's like, well, I told him he needs to fire him. He said, well, you're not the president. You can't withhold this $1 billion. He's like, call him. And then everybody laughs, call him. And then he's like, yeah, I'm on a plane in 6 hours. So, we could do this thing or we could not. And then he's like, and they fired him. We gave him the $1 billion and they put somebody good in. Yeah, somebody that wasn't going to go after his kid. It's the most unbelievable thing that's never been played on mainstream media in the United States. Not on Fox News, not on MSNBC. Generally, I think myself and Jimmy Dore have played it on the internet, and that's just about it. And yet, he was the vice president at the time. He told the guy to call the president, who would have been on a fix for $1 billion arms deal. He had arguably as much power as Trump in that situation. That's not the scandal. The scandal is Trump said, hey, are you going to look at this now that administration's out? I mean, we can do business. Like, these things haven't been going on forever. Like Brzezinski said, there are over the table and under the table arrangements. And it's very, very few and far between that the crooked under the table arrangements come to light and those responsible get prosecuted. Mr. Gosling, what would you like to end on? And why don't you tell people how people can support your work and where to find you?
Well, we do a weekly radio show, actually two here in Bristol. And that is, we got a former punk rock guitarist who runs now something called Bristol Blue Glass. That's on dialectradio.co.uk. That goes out on the FM here in Bristol. And then on a Friday, I have a 2-hour politics show. The website for that is thisweek.org.uk, where we look at all these things. But look, at the end of the day, with Brexit, we're coming towards the end game now, I really think. And it's getting interesting. It's getting exciting. And the main thing here is that we just do not know where this is going to go. And it may well be that, as you were suggesting there, we get this kind of double whammy of a financial crisis or even crash at the time of Brexit, as the oligarchy throw their toys out of the pram, and also potentially with war as well in the Middle East. Now, that could easily escalate quite quickly. The Russians already being down there, of course, and the US. So if the Russians and the US start fighting, getting involved in an Israeli-Iranian battle with the Syrians, the Lebanese, and all these people involved as well, then what would happen? The Chinese would come in, because the Chinese have absolutely said we're going to have East Jerusalem as the Palestinian capital, and they have been absolutely 100% backing that. At the same time, on the back burner, we've got Hong Kong and all the increasing in tension there. And there's a genuine dispute there, because the ordinary Hong Kong people absolutely are not going to put up with a kind of totalitarian style China regime. And it's more likely, let me say, more likely that China will become more like Hong Kong than the other way round, because the Chinese, again, are a bit like the Saudis. They're not actually rigidly there in power. They're quite fragile. Because it's such a totalitarian system they've got, an authoritarian system. And so they may see, if they start acting against Hong Kong, they may see their own people start rising up behind them in a way. As they are looking towards Hong Kong, they're trying to do stuff to Hong Kong, they may find the Chinese rising up. But then, it's such a brainwashed country. The media over there is hopeless. I even was offered a job there once, and I just took one look at it. I said, I cannot work for a TV channel which is like watching paint dry. There's no way I could do that, because it was even worse than Fox and CNN and the BBC, if you can imagine that, Jason. And at the end of the day, the real culprits in all of this are the mass media, the mainstream media, who've been just pulling the wool over our eyes for years. They don't do any proper investigative journalism. And as we've been discussing, some of the key stuff is simply will not show it. And they've become the spearhead of the war machine, leading us to war time and time again over the last 20 years. We've really got to call it out on social media. But the only trouble is they're starting to clamp down on that too, Jason.
You said it, Tony. It's a pleasure, as always. I'm not on the Skype all the time. I'm not on the Facebook all the time. People, we're on like different time zones. So I'm like, all right, I think I got them. So I'm so happy to actually have you on here. But it's great to get that European perspective that we don't get a lot in the United States. And we get a very...
Right. I mean, at the end of the day, the trouble is they believe their own propaganda. And that will be the end of them, I'm afraid. They just watch too much of their own stuff, and I'm afraid they're just not that good. I mean, the trouble is we're the good guy. We should be up there. Of course, they're not going to let us on the mainstream press, because we're the ones who are doing all the best analysis and getting the truth out to Joe Public, even though it's only through a little thin pipe. And they believe too much of their own stuff, Jason, which will be their undoing. I can promise you it's going to be tough, but ultimately they're the losers.
I love the optimism, my friend. It's always great to talk to you. I will see you soon. Thank you so much. And folks, you can support my work by coming over to this GoFundMe here, $5, $10, $15. It means the world to me. I think today's the last day. Actually, tomorrow's the last day on this one. Then we're going to do a new month. If you're not subscribed, we do great interviews like that, in-depth deep dives, and videos on all sorts of different subjects. So thumbs this video up, share it with others, make sure you're subscribed, join the Burmese Brigade, and I'm going to be on the Tinfoil Hat podcast tomorrow talking about the Las Vegas shooting if you guys are interested. So make sure to come check us out over there. With that being said, love you guys, and I will see you on the flip side.